Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to thank our two candidates for state's attorney for spending a little bit of time with us and giving us some insight into their thoughts. I am Claudia Lewis. I am president of the Carroll County League of Women Voters. The league was formed in 1920 following the time that women finally achieved the right to vote. Our main mission is to encourage participation in government, and we do that by doing the voter's guide, by doing voter registration, by holding forums of this type. And so our main goal is to have a well-informed electorate, and so your being here tonight is to help that cause. And the Community Media Center has been amazing. The Carroll County Times has been amazing. WTTR has been amazing. And if the people in Carroll County don't know what's going on when this is done, shame upon them. So Mr. Jim Lee will be moderating tonight for our state's attorney's questions, and I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Claudia. I'll start off reading for our candidates the rules for this evening's forum. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions. All candidates will answer identical questions. There will be no debate. This is an informational forum. At the conclusion of the question period and before the ending of the forum for the evening, each candidate will have 3 minutes for a summary statement. The league will be timing the responses and will use cue cards and a bell to signal the remaining time. The timekeeper shall ring the bell 2 or 3 seconds after the final stop signal is given, and I will immediately interrupt the candidate and discontinue the statement and answer at the time, and your microphone will be silenced. Questions will be selected from those submitted in advance to the Carroll County Times, the Community Media Center, the local league members, and from tonight's live audience. In addition, viewers of our live streaming program can submit questions during tonight's broadcast via Twitter, #Carroll2014. Tonight's forum is being recorded, so we ask that everyone turn off their cell phones and that attendees refrain from applause or making noise during the forum or do anything visible or audible to express support or opposition for either of the candidates. I'd like to introduce at this time to my immediate left, Mr. Jerry Barnes and Mr. Brian De Leonardo. We'll start with 3-minute opening statements. Mr. Barnes, if you could begin.
First of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, the Carroll County Times, WTTR, all the folks who are tuning in, and everyone who is here tonight. And as has been previously mentioned, I am Jerry Barnes, and I am your state's attorney. And I was elected and sworn in January of 1995, and I have been your state's attorney ever since then. I'm a fifth-generation Carroll County resident. In 1968, I entered the United States Army, and I served my country for a total of 3 years in the Army. From 1969 to 70, as a Green Beret sergeant, I spent 1 year in the jungles of the Central Highlands of Vietnam and was awarded 2 Bronze Stars and several other medals in regard to combat service. When I got out of the Army, I immediately took advantage of the GI Bill and entered the University of Baltimore, and within 6 years thereafter, I had completed an undergraduate degree with a major in political science and a law degree, and I have spent basically my whole working career serving my country, and I have spent 36 years at total as a prosecutor. 4 of those years happened to be in Frederick County as their chief narcotics prosecutor. I'm also, as if you didn't know, a Republican and an ardent supporter of our Second Amendment rights and guarantees. I want to let you know that this is a very difficult job. It's a complex job. It takes more than being a lawyer to be an effective state's attorney. It takes experience. When I started working in the state's attorney's office 35 years ago, I didn't expect to start at the top. I started and worked my way up from the bottom. So experience is the most important asset that any state's attorney can have. It takes leadership. At this point in time, I have 53 employees, and I manage an annual budget of $35 million. It takes dedication. We have my career prosecutors in the office and staff, which are very dedicated, resulting in Carroll County being the safest county in the state of Maryland since 2006. And I believe Hampstead's #1 in Maryland this past year. It also takes compassion, the kind of compassion to listen to the voices of victims, families, and witnesses when making difficult decisions that will impact people for the rest of their lives. It takes insight. It takes insight to know what's
Thank
right
you.
and what's wrong, and
Thank
guts
you.
to
Thank
do.
you. Time's up.
Okay.
Mr. DeLeonardo.
Thank you. I want to thank also the League of Women Voters, the Carroll County Media Center, Carroll County Times, WTTR, and our moderator, Jim Lee. This is a great opportunity for all of you, and appreciate those who are here this late at night to come out and hear from us. I want to introduce myself. I'm Brian DeLeonardo, and as a lifelong Republican, I am seeking to be your state's attorney. I've spent over 15 years working regularly in the criminal courts in this county, having handled over thousands of cases as both a prosecutor and private attorney. I've served as a senior assistant state's attorney for Carroll County, as well as an assistant attorney general for Maryland. I've served as a legal instructor for law enforcement, including FBI, ATF, Maryland State Police, National Fire Academy, and numerous other agencies, both around the state and around the country. I've trained thousands of police in proper investigative procedures, and have even been asked to teach our state judges and prosecutors. I recently was awarded a Maryland State Police Superintendent Salute for what it described as my countless contributions to law enforcement throughout the course of my career. While in private practice, I have represented people charged with criminal offenses, which has allowed me to directly see not only the crime and drug issues that are facing this county, but also, and perhaps more importantly, what works and what doesn't work when it comes to those that are involved in crime. I am proud to have been endorsed for state's attorney by the Carroll County Fraternal Order of Police, the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police, and the Office of State Fire Marshal. The last official statistics showed an 11% increase in serious crime, while surrounding counties saw a decrease. More stunning, we have seen a 263% increase in drug overdose deaths. And that's why I believe it's time for fresh leadership and ideas to tackle these issues. I will proactively address the serious drug abuse issues through not only effective investigation and prosecution, but greater prevention efforts to keep our children from starting drugs to begin with. I will stop the excessive plea bargaining of our most serious cases, create a repeat offender unit that will work closely with our police to target those most responsible for the crime we see. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I will restore the trust and partnership needed between law enforcement and the state's attorney. I have the experience, knowledge, passion, and plans needed to change the path we are on, and that is why I'm seeking your vote. I've never run for office before in my life, but I know that I can make a very positive difference to the community, and that's why I look forward to the discussion tonight about the issues that we have and what we can do to improve this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll jump right into the questions. What exactly, in your opinion, is the role of the state's attorney in Carroll County? And Mr. DeLeonardo, you can start, please.
Thank you. Well, it's certainly, in my opinion, a multifaceted role. I mean, first and foremost, the job of a state's attorney is to ensure successful prosecutions of those cases that are brought before the office. And that is a primary and extremely important role. But I also think there's other roles. I mean, I think the state's attorney has a very important role in providing training to our law enforcement. One of the things that I think is an incredible asset is the fact that I have been doing that for our law enforcement, as well as prosecutors in the state, as well as even judges I've been asked to teach for. And I think that's extremely important to have that education, because as we've seen with the transition, having really thorough training is important. I also think the state's attorney is really important in educating the public on prevention issues. It's why, in my opinion, I think it's extremely important for a state's attorney to be out in the community. That means being involved in the schools, educating parents about the drug issues that we're facing, the serious drug issues, as well as also being out in the community to talk about crime prevention. One of the things I think is extremely important is to go out, and especially to our seniors, and educate about the different ways, the different scams that are done against our seniors, which is one of the things I've actually done without being state's attorney, and I certainly would do much more regularly as state's attorney.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes?
Well, actually, I've been doing this for 35 years as a prosecutor and over 19 years as state's attorney, and I've come to learn that the primary job of a state's attorney, first of all, was an administrator. We have an office currently of 53 employees. We have 17 attorneys. We have several units in that office, and on a daily basis, as your state's attorney, I answer phone calls, I meet with citizens, I meet with police on a daily basis. I go over serious cases, cases that are not so serious, with the prosecutors in the office and provide them with the appropriate advice and provide them with the appropriate answers in regard to legal questions. We have police coming in and out of our office on a daily basis, and we have a very, very close working relationship with them. Otherwise, it would be impossible to have Carroll County in the situation as it is now as being the safest county in the state of Maryland since 2006. That would be impossible to accomplish if we didn't have a close working relationship with the public and law enforcement. And it takes insight to know what's right and what's wrong and guts to do something about it, regardless of the ultimate consequences. You make tough decisions on a weekly basis. They're not done on a partisan basis. They're done in regard to what's right, what's wrong, what's lawful, and what's constitutional. It's a tough, tough, difficult job.
Thank you. How do you view the current relationship between the state's attorney's office and law enforcement agencies? And what can be done to improve on those relationships to effectively fight crime from arrest to trial? Mr. Barnes, could you go first?
We, as I mentioned previously, we have an excellent working relationship with all law enforcement, starting with municipalities, state police, Westminster City Police. I'm a very close friend with the U.S. Attorney, who we work with very closely. The members of my office and both myself have on many occasions taught in-service classes, taught specialty classes. On a daily basis, they call us for advice. In the middle of the night, we're available 24/7 for advice in regard to any type situation that may come up. And once again, you can't be the safest county in the state of Maryland without having a close, effective, working relationship with law enforcement. That would be impossible.
Thank you. Mr. De Leonardo?
Thank you. Well, I would say, first of all, we heard it from the earlier forum with the sheriffs. You heard 3 of those individuals who are involved in the community, and 2 of which are in law enforcement, that said that there's not a positive relationship. I would also say that the fact that I've been endorsed by the Carroll County Fraternal Order of Police also shows that there's not a strong partnership. It is unfortunate, and when you look back within just the last couple of years of the public blasting that was going on regarding an entire department. And that has effects. I mean, that has effects on how law enforcement sees the office, and there has to be trust, there has to be partnership. And when you don't have that, that's when you see issues of crime and you see issues of drugs. No one is suggesting that Carroll County has not been an overall safe community, but what we've seen over the last, since 2006, the issue is what we're seeing now. I believe to have that strong partnership, you have to be at the meetings with the Fraternal Order of Police as state's attorney, and I believe you have to be the one who's out there educating and working with your law enforcement. And I believe you have to be the one that's going to the Fraternal Order of Police meetings to talk about what the men and women who are working on the streets and who are in the courtrooms, what issues they're doing. Because if you don't have that person-to-person relationship, then that's essentially where there becomes a disconnect. And I believe that's why you see the Fraternal Order of Police supporting me, because they recognize that that partnership is lacking, and in fact publicly said that their belief was that partnership was lacking in their endorsement.
Thank you. I noticed during the first two questions, in the opening statements, Mr. De Leonardo has referenced rising crime and crime getting worse in the county. Mr. Barnes has referred to the safest county in the area. So listening to what your opponent is saying and reconciling that with what you're saying, how safe is Carroll County?
Carroll County is very
Wait,
safe.
And Mr. De Leonardo gets to go first this time.
Look, Carroll County has definitely been historically a safe community. At one time, Randallstown was as well, and at one time, Owings Mills was as well. And as you've heard, one of the sheriff candidates said that earlier, is that you're seeing a change. You're seeing a change in the urbanization of certain crime, and that's what we see. It's really led by your drugs. The health department has noted a 263% increase in drug overdose deaths from 2012, when the statewide increase was merely 15%. What is particularly troubling, if you look at the heroin-related drug overdose deaths in 2012, Carroll ranked 7th. And they had more cumulative overdose deaths from heroin than Frederick, Howard, or Harford County, which tells you the size of those counties that there's a significant issue. Carroll's also tied 5th in the state for the number of prescription opioid-related deaths in 2012, which actually tied with Montgomery County and was more than Frederick, Howard, and Prince George's County. Now, when you see that kind of a drug increase, and I see it in court, I'm in court very frequently, when you see that kind of a drug overdose, what necessarily follows is crime. And that's why you see those two, they run hand in hand. And that's why it is not the history. A parent who has a child that overdoses and dies now, or a person who has their door kicked in and it's burglarized, does not care what the crime rate was the last 6 years. What they care about is what's being done now and what we can do to fix it. And that's what I think we need to do. And sitting and saying constantly to the public that we're safe, there's no issues, is one of the reasons why parents who do have those issues where their child have overdosed and died and sit there and said, I had no idea this was an issue, that's what has to be changed.
Thank you.
All right,
Mr. Barnes?
All right,
Sorry.
okay. With percentages, you can twist them, you can spin them, you can make them come up with any conclusion that you choose. Once again, I'm going to say, in 2012, yes, there was a 12% increase in certain types of crimes, and they were basically misdemeanor crimes, breaking into sheds, thefts of property, breaking into cars. In 2013, we're going to see one of the best years that we've ever seen based on preliminary data since 1986. So what we're talking about today is an improvement. They have these types of crimes that occur in every county in this state. And as far as drug abuse situations, I began the Heroin Kills program, and we have reinstituted that program. I took steps myself to begin the formation with Senator Larry Haynes and Richard Dixon, the former treasurer, to create, and now which exists, a long-term heroin treatment facility which is located on Springfield State Hospital grounds today. And we continue to talk about heroin results. Actually, the amount here is very small. Many of those were prescription overdoses that occurred. So, once again, statistics and results are being twisted, and they are not really accurate. And we are doing and continue to do everything we can do along with the Board of Ed to educate people in the school system and students in regard to drug use and abuse. That's why we still utilize the K9 scan system.
Thank you. What is your opinion of the effectiveness of decriminalization and rehabilitation in the war on drugs? And where do you think law enforcement and other county resources can be most efficiently allocated? Mr. Barnes, could you start?
You mentioned in regard to the decriminalization.
The effectiveness of decriminalization and rehabilitation in the war on drugs.
The decriminalization, I would imagine that you're talking about the piece of legislation that'll go into effect October the 1st, and that being 10 grams or less of marijuana will now become decriminalized, so to speak, and will become a civil citation situation, and I think it's $100 for the first offense, and would be even $80 if you paid it out early. And what I believe, first of all, is I'm totally opposed to that. Marijuana is clearly, and has been proven to be a gateway drug into more serious drug use. And furthermore, what kind of an example is it going to set for children? Our children, since we've been talking about our children here all evening, watching perhaps their parents sitting at home at night smoking marijuana. Naturally, they're going to believe it's okay. Naturally, they're eventually going to perhaps participate in smoking marijuana. And hopefully, they don't, but many will. It's going to cause problems for our school system. It's going to cause a lot of problems for law enforcement, and it's going to cause a great deal of problems for state's attorneys all over the state, as it is now in Colorado. And it's going to cause a lot of extra court time to be utilized because of weights and quantities and potential punishments. It's a horrible idea, and I'm very sorry because the State's Attorney's Association took a strict piece of opposition against that bill and submitted it to the governor.
Thank you. Mr. DeLeonardo?
I agree with Mr. Barnes. Absolutely, I'm against the idea of the decriminalization. And as a father of 4 boys, I definitely agree with him that we don't want to have that because it is a gateway. In my experience and what I've seen people, it's similar in alcohol, that both of them wind up being sort of the predicates for drawing people in when it comes to using drugs. The other aspect of the question, which was really about the aspect, what do you think about treatment? And I think that's a huge issue because the reality is with a lot of our drug offenders that you're seeing that first come into the system, if you don't intervene early, they will continue to commit crimes until ultimately they get locked up. One of the issues, we do have a drug court in Carroll County, but it's geared in circuit court, which is essentially to people that are facing a long-term incarceration because they've committed 4 or 5 crimes. What we don't have is something to intervene with these people in district court. The only diversion program is frankly the same diversion program when I was there over 15 years that worked at the state's attorney's office, which was a year-long diversion for someone that get caught with marijuana. But if you go into court and you have a possession of heroin for the first time, you're going to get a probation before judgment and you're going to walk out the door. That's the same as a traffic ticket. And the problem is that person that is being caught with heroin, they're not going to just stop. It's not a one-time thing. You have to have a strict intervention to prevent them from having to wait to commit 3 to 4 crimes before they then are eligible for drug court. I would like to see us implement a much more proactive approach like other counties have, where when you get into court and you have those first-time offenders with things like heroin, that we just don't let you walk out the door with a PBJ, but we offer a very intensive supervision program in conjunction with probation.
Thank you. Mr. DeLeonardo, you get to start with the next question. It says, how many plea bargains and plea negotiations have you been involved in? So I guess as a defense attorney now, how many of your clients did you bargain for? And then when it comes time for Mr. Barnes, how many plea bargains did he do? Mr. DeLeonardo, if you could
Well,
start.
because I've spent 15 years in there, and I would say certainly about 10 years or so in private practice, I've been there for the last 10 years, I'd say because the vast majority of my work is in Carroll County, I get a lot of plea bargains from my clients. And sometimes I've walked out of court, to be perfectly frank with you, and said, I can't believe I got offered that deal. But my job as a private attorney is to do what's absolutely the best for my client. That's my job. And I believe in the Constitution. I believe it very strongly. When I was a prosecutor, my job was to do what's the best interest of the public. And when I'm doing a private attorney, I'm representing someone, my job is to do the best for them. So I will tell you, as far as Carroll County goes, I've plea bargained an awful lot of my cases, including most serious cases. And I've gotten tremendous results for my client. But why I'm running is that very reason. Because while it is good for my individual client, it's not good for the community. And what I've seen is excessive. A good example of that is when you look back at some of the statistics from 2011, you actually look at the cases, each case, the series cases, what you find is over the vast majority of cases, whatever that most serious charge was, never gets convicted. It's always pled away, and I've benefited from that. My clients have benefited from that. In other counties, like Baltimore County, the plea offer is the top charge and guidelines. So I have the benefit of seeing how other counties work, and you will find among the defense community that they love coming to Carroll County because their clients thinks they're the next Clarence Darrow, that they're brilliant because they're getting these great deals. So I will absolutely say, absolutely, I plea bargained probably the majority of my cases in Carroll County. That's true.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes?
Okay, the question's not quite that simple. And we have been told the exact opposite from people all over the state, that they really do not like to come to Carroll County because their plea negotiations are not that good for their clients. And to start off with, when you talk about a plea negotiation with a serious charge, whatever type charge you're talking about, first of all, the prosecutor has to analyze the case, the evidence, the witnesses, and the probability of a conviction if a trial were to occur. And I'm sure Mr. DeLeonardo is familiar with that concept. That's where the process starts. We meet with the families, we meet with the court, and obviously we meet with the defense counsel. And this is not a very simple process. It's a lengthy process, and in the end, what a lot of people forget is that on any kind of charge, especially a plea bargain, and we really don't plea bargain serious cases away. I can tell you that for a fact. The court, in the end, no matter what our recommendation, unless we have an agreement with the court, is the final determination of the sentence that a person will ultimately receive. Carroll County, I assure you, is not easy. It's one of the toughest counties.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Barnes, you'll get to start with the next question. As from our audience, as a victim of cyber harassment with a peace order against my harasser, I would like to hear about the candidate's willingness to enforce such peace orders. A friend from Virginia was told by the SAO in another county to stay out of Maryland and stay off the internet when he sought protection from a harasser. So just your willingness to hear about your willingness to enforce peace orders on cyber harassment. Mr. Barnes?
Well, we have a special unit. We also have a phone lab that we created, and we receive these type of complaints and charges from district court commissioners on a constant basis. Many of those cases, because they are basically two people or a series of people that are engaged in constant exchanges because they are having some type of a petty dispute, those kind of cases are viewed in a different manner. As many as we've seen cases with hundreds of charges where two people just don't like each other and they keep making exchanges back and forth. And we try to mediate those cases out, but the serious ones, especially the ones involved with domestic violence, harassment type situations, serious situations, we handle those in the courtroom as we should. We're very serious about those crimes.
Thank you. Mr. DeLeonardo?
Yeah, obviously, you would have to know the details of what's involved with that to know exactly, sort of what the issues are. But it poses an interesting question, or certainly an interesting emerging issue, which is the technology and the harassment that's happening through technology. We see it with things like not only email, but also Facebook and Twitter and those type of things. And I think that's why it's very important for a state's attorney to be up on the technology that's being done, what is the latest. Our children are certainly using it. The issue of cyberbullying is not only for adults that might be the subject of protective order, but you're seeing it a lot with our children. And that's also something that I think is very important, to not only have that education that is done through the schools to try to advise on preventing cyberbullying, but I think that's something as state's attorney that I would want to see is a lot more utilization of our technology to not only reach the children and advise them on those issues, but issues of cyberbullying as well. As far as violation of protective orders, when you have a judge's order and it's being violated, that should be the end of the story. That should be something you should be able to go into court and certainly fight. So without knowing the details in specific, it's hard to comment further on that.
Thank you. Our next question. Carroll County cannot now use the Maryland State Police Drug Recognition Expert Protocol. Do you want it back? And I would add to that question, what are you going to do to get it back if you do want it back? Mr. DeLeonardo?
Thank you. Yeah, obviously I know that question was coming. I will tell you, as a private attorney, my job is to represent my clients. And frankly, when I was young, I was a victim. Both my mother and I have a head-on crash from an alcohol-impaired driver. This is not a question of being pro drug driving or alcohol driving. But I have a duty when I represent my clients to make sure that their constitutional rights are protected. In doing that in this county, I came across a situation where there was unscientific and inappropriate information that was being relied on as an opinion in order to arrest people. And so I brought a challenge to that in this county. We had a 10-day hearing. We had experts from Johns Hopkins who came in, and what they said was that this particular item that was being used was unscientific and it was unreliable, and that it led to innocent people, or certainly could lead to innocent people being arrested and charged. Now, why it's not being used? It's not being used because the administrative judge for this county agreed that that was true, agreed that it was unreliable and it was invalid. Now, the state's attorney's office, in fact, was involved in that challenge, and the judge did not agree with them. In fact, no judge agrees with them. And so, as far as fixing that issue, I would recommend that, having sat through that hearing, that you take what was unreliable and fix it. I have been asked to teach by defense attorneys on that issue, judges, and I've been consulted by prosecutors as to these issues, because there are a lot of prosecutors in the state that share concern over that. But the reality is, the solution is not to take something that is unscientific and use that to arrest people. The solution is to fix it to make sure that you're getting the right people that are impaired, and that's exactly what I would do.
Mr. Barnes?
Okay. One of the most effective tools we had in Carroll County, and I have discussed this with the administrative judge so that I wasn't insulting the judge, and he did in fact rule after a 10-day protracted series of hearings that the DRE testimony did not meet the Frye-Reed test, was scientifically unsound. On the other hand, a Montgomery County judge, circuit court, heard a very similar case and came up with the exact opposite result, that it was not new or novel, not a scientific situation, but merely trained observations. And that is currently in the Court of Special Appeals, and hopefully a ruling will come soon. I also went to Annapolis and did my staff on 2 separate occasions to try and straighten out whatever problem the opponent has pointed out through the legislature. He went there as a civilian witness and testified against us. 2 years in a row we went to the legislature and tried to rectify this situation. Now we have the decriminalization of 10 grams or less of marijuana. This was one of the drugs that a DRE, drug recognition expert, could recognize and could ultimately require a blood test for when someone's operating a motor vehicle about ready to injure or kill someone on the highways of Carroll County. So this is a very serious situation, and hopefully it's going to be rectified by the Court of Special Appeals or, once again, by the State's Attorneys Association and with my participation in Annapolis with new legislation.
Thank you. The next question, and Mr. Barnes, you could start. What do you believe the state's attorney's role is in Carroll County to avoid repeat offenders?
Repeat offenders, we have several repeat offenders. Our whole office is a repeat offender unit, so to speak. Our cases, starting from district court to circuit court, juvenile court, the criminal histories are updated every 30 days. Every 30 days. And certainly when you are deciding what to do with a case, how to work it out, whether it's to be tried before a court, a jury, whether there should be an attempt to work it out based on the evidence or the witnesses, you certainly take into consideration, that's the first thing you look at. Whenever anyone comes to me and asks me about a case, my first question is to them, well, what is the person's criminal history? Let's start right there. Our whole office is a repeat offender unit. We do this every day with thousands of cases a year. And we handle about 5,000 new cases in district court each year and about 1,200 in circuit court each year. And we are one of the few counties that continuously, and that being myself because I've tried most of them, utilize 25 and 10-year without parole sentences for felony drug offenders and for violent offenders based on their prior criminal histories.
Thank you. Mr. DeLeonardo?
Well, certainly repeat offenders are an issue. There tends to be a particular portion of people that are responsible for repeatedly committing these crimes. But to say that an office entirely is a repeat offender unit is certainly inaccurate. What I will say is, and actually 20 years ago, Mr. Barnes, one of his main issues was he wanted to establish a repeat offender unit. And apparently now the whole office is one. I will tell you, if you look at other counties, they've been successful in creating these units. The units are not just looking at someone's criminal record, but what you do is you actually look at the individual, you score. You basically score them on factors, seriousness of the crime, the amount that they're repeated. And you essentially will have your list of people that are your serious offenders. And certainly when you have them in court, you go after them, but that's only part of it. Part of it is, even once they're back out in the community, letting them know that they are on that list. Having cooperation with police and probation and dedicated prosecutors who are essentially working together to identify these most troublesome people in the community. And when you do that, you take that top percentage of individuals that are responsible for most of the crime. You're not just reactive. You're not just waiting for them to commit a crime and then looking at their record. What you're doing is you're proactively going out and identifying those individuals, letting them know that you're on the list, and that if they come through the courtroom, you're going to aggressively go after them. That's a very different situation when you talk about the creation of a repeat offender unit than simply when someone commits a crime looking at the record. There would obviously be no reason for a repeat offender unit in these other places that have been very successful. But again, that's why you have to have the strong relationship and cooperation between prosecutors, police, and probation agents.
Thank you. Our next question, and Mr. DeLeonardo, if you could start. Can you speak specifically to what can be done to lower incidents of domestic violence?
Sure. There's obviously a number of ways that I think you have to do that. Education is certainly one of those in terms of getting out and educating people, because what happens is many times the victims of domestic violence, they don't want to come forward. They're uncooperative, and those can be very difficult cases, certainly challenging for the prosecutor's office as well, and I recognize that because many times someone that's a victim will change their mind by the time they come to court. And that creates a lot of challenges when you're dealing with these domestic violence cases. But the other main issue is substance abuse. Alcohol and drugs are a driving force in a lot of situations where it results in domestic violence. I've certainly seen my share of those cases. You will often see that mixture that results or sort of triggers the domestic violence incident. So when we talk about drug overdoses and we talk about those levels, how we're outstripping other counties, dealing with the substance abuse issues is going to be not only a situation that will help reduce overall crime, but it will help reduce domestic violence incidents. Because again, if you look at the situation and you're in court, drugs and alcohol is a driving factor in almost all of the crime that you see. And so that would be my focus as well.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes?
Over 15 years ago, I started an exclusive domestic violence unit comprised of a exclusive prosecutor, grant funded at that time, still is partially grant funded, an investigator, a retired Maryland State Police First Sergeant, Detective Sergeant, who is the investigator on those type of crimes, and a victim witness service individual to help the victims in those crimes. We also were able to obtain surveillance equipment of all types and nature, which in appropriate cases we utilize for persons that are victims of domestic violence where the offender may still be out of jail on some type of a bond release issue. And we have a basic zero tolerance in regard to domestic violence type crimes. And there's no question in my mind when you want to talk about repeat offenders, and we tried that in the past, it's not that simple. It was a monetary issue that stopped it. There's no money. It takes a lot of money to fund a specialty unit of that nature. In domestic violence, we constantly work with these individuals, and I know we prevented serious injury and homicides in domestic violence situations because they are some of the most vicious situations that exist that can erupt very, very quickly and unexpectedly and result in serious bodily injury or death. I think we have done more in the realm of domestic violence than most any state's attorney's office in the state of Maryland, and I'm very proud of the people that work in that office and what we've been able to deter in regard to domestic violence. It's a very serious situation.
Thank you. The next question seems to be really directed primarily at Mr. Barnes, and you get to start this time, so I'll just embellish it a little bit. The question is, how many murder cases have you tried, and what was your role? I would add to that for Mr. DeLeonardo, how many murder cases have you been involved in, and what was your role? And if you could both put, to give us, or the audience, some statistics on your, Mr. Barnes, conviction rate, and Mr. DeLeonardo, your ability to get your clients off of the charges. Mr. Barnes, could you start?
I can start, and I did, over my 35 years, work up a number, and I've handled approximately 12 homicide cases in my career. I have never lost one, not one. I did, in fact, when I worked in Frederick, try a homicide case that was totally based on circumstantial evidence that lasted for over 1 month. And the jury deliberated for almost 3.5 weeks. And one single person held out not to convict. The other 12 were ready to convict on the first day of deliberation. On all the other cases, I have received harsh sentences ranging from multiple life without parole sentences, consecutive life without parole sentences, life sentences, 60-year sentences, and probably higher than that. But I have never actually lost a homicide case. I did, in fact, have a hung jury. That individual was ultimately convicted and violated his probation and received his life sentence ultimately anyway. He had, in fact, murdered his wife while she sat in her car with a .357 Magnum. He shot her twice in the head. The problem was there was virtually no evidence, and there were no witnesses, and there were no cooperating witnesses. And I did, in fact, call about 105 witnesses, if I recall correctly, and it lasted about a month and a half. So one homicide's too many. It's really difficult to talk about them, and in one instance, I did, in fact, seek a death penalty on a double homicide here in Carroll County. That person received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole.
Thank you.
Deservingly so.
Thank you. Mr. DeLeonardo?
Yeah, I have not sat down and calculated how many I've handled. I've certainly handled them as both a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. I certainly have handled my role in serious cases. I don't think there's any question of my experience and ability to do that. Actually, part of the training that I've done for some of the law enforcement is in shooting cases and how to handle those cases. I've handled, obviously, serious charges and homicide cases here. And it's tough. I mean, those are tough cases when you're involved, no matter what side you're on, because the stakes are so high and you want to do the right job. I have to listen a little bit, though, when I hear that I've never lost a case, when Mr. Barnes wants to say that, because in my review, he's had 8 cases that he's handled really since '06, just 8. 4 were dismissed, and I assume, and I believe some of those were because they were referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They weren't homicides. And 2 that he pled, and 2 that actually went to trial. So we could say I've never lost one, but if you have a first-degree murder charge that you plead a second degree, or you have a second-degree murder case that you plead a manslaughter and the person gets 3 years, you can say you never lost a homicide, but I don't know that that's accurate, because as a prosecutor, you have ultimate control of what you do. And so if you have some concern that you can lose a case, what you do is you offer an offer they can't refuse. And if you're facing second-degree murder and the state's attorney offers you manslaughter, you're going to jump on it, especially when it involves stabbing someone repeatedly down in Martins. If you're facing potential of life without parole and you get offered 30 years, which makes you eligible for parole in 15 years, you jump on it. And so to say that never lost a case, I think we have to be clear that if you're doing your job, you sometimes do.
Okay, Mr. DeLeonardo, you get to go first for the next question. What specific programs need to be in place in schools to prevent distribution and use of illegal substances and other dangerous crimes? What are the roles of the state's attorney and schools in implementing or continuing these programs?
I definitely think the state's attorney has a major role in that, and I believe it starts with the state's attorney actually going into the schools and talking. There's several things. I think a state's attorney, first and foremost, we hear about the fact that it's the sheriff's office that actually has gone in and done education in the schools and educating children about drug-related issues, and I think that's great. And the health department as well. I've talked to them several times. They also do their best to get in and educate students. But I can tell you the missing factor in all of this is really educating the parents. Because what happens is you can educate the students, but if you're not educating the parents, then the parents are not seeing the signs and symptoms in their children. I mean, my poor children, because I've been around this in my whole career from both sides of the aisle, they get interrogated over everything. And you need parents to be educated. I spoke with one of the victims of an overdose who said they simply knew there was no problem, their son was a victim of an overdose and death, and did not realize the issues. So certainly that's one, getting in front of the teachers, the parents' associations with schools. I also think it's important to get back in terms of having a drug investigator. Mr. Barnes, many years ago, had a dedicated drug investigator in the office, and I thought that was extremely effective in working with the schools and working with law enforcement as someone who was a spearhead to bring these players together, but that's been lacking for many years. And that's something I think that really needs to be prioritized. And lastly, I think education is a huge issue when it comes to utilizing technology. We have to utilize technology through Facebook and things like that to really reach not only children but adults as to the nature of the problem. Because if we don't acknowledge the seriousness of the drug overdose problem,
Thank you.
parents won't
Thank
know.
you. Mr. Barnes?
It's a very important issue in the school system, and I can tell you this, that it may have already gone out. Annually, we send a very detailed letter out to every parent of the, that is and has a student in the Carroll County Public School System, advising them in regard to the potential bad outcome of substance abuse and alcohol abuse. And we've been doing that for several years, and I believe that letter has just gone out on an annual basis. The DARE program no longer exists that the state police conducted in the school system. I would encourage, and many of the sheriff's candidates talked about it, that the sheriff's department, in addition to adopting a school and local departments as adopting a school, that they re-engage in a DARE-type program. As I started before, I began the Heroin Kills program, and by the way, I paid for it myself. The bumper stickers, the magnets, the signs, and whatever went with it. We work very closely with the school system and its security director almost on a weekly and daily basis in regard to drug offenses that occur in school. Canine scans. I totally disagree with the individual in the sheriff's group that said that this is totally worthless. It's not totally worthless. We didn't engage in it to create new juvenile cases. That was not the point at all. The point was to deter an individual, a student, from bringing drugs into the school setting and onto the parking lot in regard to the cars. And it did work, and it does work. And we continue to have an exclusive juvenile prosecutor that works very closely with the school system. The teachers in their health curriculum, I know, have an excellent program that they present on a continuous basis in regard to substance abuse. So I think we're doing many things here.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move on to your closing statements. You'll have 3 minutes for those. Mr. Barnes, you started with your opening statement first, so we'll go with Mr. DeLeonardo for his closing statement first.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank everyone tonight for staying late with us. And again, thank you to all the participants in helping to put this on. I think it's tremendous. As someone who has never run for office, it's been an impressive experience to do this. And again, I ran because I believe strongly that I can make a difference. I believe very strongly that we're at a crossroads in law enforcement in the county, and I want to be part of the solution to fix this. We've seen surging overdose deaths, and I talked about that earlier. If you look at the raw statistics, this isn't playing with percentages, as was alluded to earlier. Look at the raw statistics, the number of people that have died from overdose deaths in this county, and you will find it exceeds other counties that are much larger than us. That's an issue. And I want to be part of fixing that, and I know I can. It's not a coincidence that you see the corresponding drug and crime issues that are rising together. And it's also not a coincidence that not long ago, a health department representative told the Carroll County Times that we are experiencing an epidemic. I will tell you that just last week, I spoke with some of the health department officials who said they've never seen it this bad when it comes to their drug issues. That ought to be a wake-up call. I believe after 20 years, it really is time for new leadership. I believe, and frankly, Mr. Barnes made that argument 20 years ago. He made the argument 20 years ago that 20 years was too long and you needed to have something new. This is a tough job. It's a 24/7 job. And he was right then, and I'm right now. It's time to make that change. We can't be reactive any longer. We must be proactive. The stakes are too high, and that's why I'm ready to take on that responsibility and move forward. The men and women who wear the badge in this county have seen past a lot of the arguments and the political rhetoric that you see when it comes with campaigns, and they know what's really happening on the streets and in the courtrooms, and they know what needs to change. And that is why I've received their endorsement, because they know that I'll bring the change, I'll bring the plans, and I'll bring the energy that's needed. The reality is I have that experience. I have the passion to do this. I have the skills and the knowledge that will bring this to the position that I'm doing. And that's why I want to make the change, and that's why I'm asking you for your vote. And it is an important vote, and I appreciate your time listening to me tonight. I thank you all very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
All right, in closing, we do in fact have a heroin strategy with law enforcement and specifically with the Drug Enforcement Administration, local police, Baltimore City Police, the Carroll County Drug Task Force, and I recall, in fact, one of the members of our local drug task force responding to the health department representative, where do you keep coming up with this heroin epidemic? It's not here. It just doesn't exist. The prevalent drug in this county, and continues to be, is marijuana. You know, it's been said it's time for a change. Is it? Carroll County's been Maryland's safest county since 2006. Preliminary data suggests it's even getting better. The only thing it's time for is to continue the policies that my office has instituted in cooperation with law enforcement that we put in place over the last several years to make this county the safest county in the state of Maryland. My office continuously works with and supports law enforcement. But overall, okay, you, the citizens of Carroll County, to ensure that justice prevails. We work with you and for you to ensure that justice will prevail and strict adherence to everyone's constitutional rights will be upheld. The only endorsement that's really important here in the end, and always is, the position of state's attorney will be obviously determined in this primary election on June the 24th and the week prior to that. It has once again truly been both an honor and a privilege for me to serve as your state's attorney for that period of time. And once again, I seek your support for that position, and it's time, and why would you change the legacy of success at this point in time? You know, promises are empty, allegations are easy to make, but actual results, such as being the safest county in the state of Maryland, are proven, indisputable facts. Carroll County is, in fact, or why would so many policemen move here and live here, as they've just told you within the last couple hours? Why? Because it's a safe place to live for them, for their families, for their children. And the second reason, and maybe it's their first reason, we have probably the best school system in the state of Maryland here in Carroll County, I assure you, in every respect possible. And if you want to learn more, you can certainly check my website at CAPS, www.reelectjerrybarnes, that's all small cap, it's all small case, point,
Thank you.
com, C-O-M, small case.
Thank you both for your answers.
Say that this has been very informative for me, and I'm sure that will shed a lot of light for many citizens. Hopefully they're tuned in or will tune in to watch the replays. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for being moderator this evening. I know it's been a tough night for you. I want to thank you for staying and being here as live audience and for your questions. If there are questions that we didn't get to, we will submit them to you so that you can answer them. And those answers will be posted on the Community Media Center. The rebroadcast will be on Channel 19 Friday at 9 o'clock in the evening, Saturday, May 3rd at 10:30, and again at 1:30 in the afternoon, and then Monday, May 5th at 10:30, 1:30 p.m., and 9 p.m., so 3 times on Monday. So at least we'll get some air time for you. Community Media Center, cameramen, you're wonderful. And WTTR, thank you so much. And I have to say, Carroll County Times will have their own version of the voter's guide. And Mr. Lee says that you just kind of scroll over the map to where you live, and everybody will pop up, and the answers to questions will pop up for them. And the League of Women Voters has the Vote 411 answers to questions, and you just type in your address, and who you are eligible to vote for will show up, and their answers to the questions. So those things will be available before the primary, once May 8th gets here, and I think that that will provide ample opportunity for increasing your knowledge. This has been wonderful. I really have enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Thank you for staying. Have a good night.